I'm staring at the empty apartment right now, typing this on my phone, because they took the laptop too. The one I bought with my own money. The silence is so loud it's making my ears ring. 3 years. 3 fucking years I gave them everything. And now I'm sitting on the floor. Because guess what? They took the couch, the bed, even the coffee maker I got for my birthday last year from my mom. You want to know the worst part? I saw it coming. Deep down, I knew. But I kept making excuses. Kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Love makes you stupid like that. Makes you ignore the red flags waving right in your face. It started small. Marcus would borrow $20 for gas and forget to pay me back. Then it was $50 for his phone bill. Then $100 for his mom's medication. Always his mom's medication. I found out later his mom died when he was 12. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, when I thought I'd found my person. 4 years ago, I was working at that little bookstore downtown. The one that smelled like vanilla and old paper. I loved that job, even though it paid shit. I was saving up for my master's degree, living in my studio apartment, eating ramen 4 nights a week. But I was happy. Content, you know. I had my little routine. My books, my independence. I had just gotten out of a relationship with David, this guy from college, who turned out to be seeing 3 other women while dating me. Found out through Instagram, of course. Saw photos of him at some girl's birthday party. Arms wrapped around her, like she was his whole world. The same way he used to hold me. So I was done with dating, done with men, done with trusting people who said they loved me. I was focusing on myself, on my goals, on building the life I actually wanted, instead of molding myself around someone else's needs. That's when Marcus walked in, tall dark hair, wearing this vintage leather jacket that looked like it cost more than my rent. He wandered the poetry section for an hour, actually reading the books, instead of just flipping through them like most people do. When he came to the counter with 3 collections by authors I'd never heard anyone my age even mention. I was impressed despite myself. Good choices, I said, scanning the books. He smiled. And fuck, what a smile. You know Adrian Rich? I quoted my favorite lines from Diving Into the Wreck, without thinking, and his whole face lit up. We talked for 20 minutes about poetry, about books, about how hard it is to find people who actually read anymore. When he asked for my number, I almost said no. I was done with dating, remember? But there was something about the way he talked. About literature, about art, about the world. Like he saw beauty everywhere and wanted to share it with someone who would understand. So I gave him my number, telling myself it was just friendship. 2 book lovers connecting over shared interests. Our first date was at this hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese place he knew about. He insisted on paying, said he was old-fashioned that way. I found it charming after David, who used to split everything down to the penny, and once made me Venmo him for my half of a shared appetizer. Marcus told me he was between jobs, working on his novel, doing some freelance graphic design to pay the bills. He had this way of talking about his dreams that made them sound inevitable, like success was just around the corner waiting for him. He'd show me sketches on his phone, logos he'd designed for small businesses, pages of handwritten
prose that actually sounded good. I should have asked more questions.
about the freelance work, about why he was between jobs for the 3rd time this year, about why his phone kept buzzing with texts he wouldn't look at during dinner, about why he always wanted to meet at my place instead of his. But he was so attentive, so interested in everything I had to say. He asked about my writing, my plans for grad school, my family back in Ohio. He listened like every word mattered. When's the last time someone made you feel like the most fascinating person in the room? The sex was good, really good. He had this way of making me feel beautiful, desired. Like I was the only woman who'd ever existed. He'd trace patterns on my skin and whisper poetry in my ear afterward. You're so perfect, he'd murmur into my hair. I can't believe you're real. God, I was such a fucking cliche. Looking back, I can see how calculated it all was. The poetry, the attention, the way he made me feel special and chosen. Marcus had a system, and I walked right into it with my eyes wide open. 3 months in, he started staying over most nights. Not because I invited him, but because he just never left. We'd have dinner, watch a movie, and suddenly it was late, and he was tired. And wouldn't it make more sense for him to just sleep over? 6 months in, I gave him a key, because it was easier than him texting me, to buzz him up at all hours. Just for convenience, I told myself. Just so I don't have to get dressed to let him in when I'm already in bed. 8 months in, his landlord screwed him over, and he needed a place to crash, just for a few weeks, while he found something new. The story changed every time he told it. First, it was because the landlord was selling the building. Then it was because of a rent increase he couldn't afford. Then it was because there was a mold problem the landlord wouldn't fix. Those few weeks turned into a year and a half. But it didn't feel like he was taking advantage. It felt like we were building something together. Like I was being supportive and understanding. The kind of girlfriend who stood by her man through tough times. He made me feel mature, responsible. Like I was the stable one in the relationship who could handle anything. I'm so lucky to have you, he'd say, pulling me close. You're saving my life, you know that. I don't know what I'd do without you. And I'd melt. Because who doesn't want to be someone's salvation? Who doesn't want to be the person who makes the difference? Who provides the love and support that helps someone achieve their dreams? The first time I found the credit card application in his name, using my address, he said it was a mistake. He'd had mail forwarded and forgot to change it. Made sense. The second time, he got defensive. Jesus, Sarah, it's just mail. Why are you going through my stuff? I wasn't going through his stuff. It was sitting on our kitchen counter, my kitchen counter, in my apartment that I paid for. But somehow I ended up apologizing. That's how it worked with Marcus. I'd bring up something that bothered me, and somehow, by the end of the conversation, I was the one saying sorry. He had This way of twisting things around, making me question my own memory, my own feelings. You're being paranoid, he'd say, pulling me into his arms. I love you. Why would I hurt you? And I'd melt, because he did say he loved me. All the time. In the morning when I brought him coffee in bed. At night when we were tangled up together. During random moments when I was just existing. Reading, or cooking, or brushing my teeth. I love you, Sarah. You're everything to me. The words felt real. They sounded real. How was I supposed to know the difference? But looking back, I realized he never actually showed love. He said the words. But when did he ever put my needs first? When did he ever sacrifice anything for me? The way I was constantly sacrificing for him. The money thing got worse gradually. Like a slow leak in a tire, you don't notice until you're stranded on the side of the road. First, it was him not contributing to groceries, because he was waiting for a client to pay him. Then it was me, covering his half of dinner, because his card got declined, and he was so embarrassed. I started keeping track in a notebook. I hid in my desk drawer. 20 here, 50 there, the occasional 100, for an emergency. After 6 months, it added up to almost $3,000. When I showed him the numbers, he cried. Actually cried. Sat on my couch, with tears running down his face, talking about how ashamed he was. How he'd pay me back as soon as his novel sold. How he didn't deserve me. I'm such a fuck-up, Sarah. You should leave me. You deserve better. But he said it in this way that made it clear he didn't want me to actually leave. He wanted me to reassure him, to tell him he wasn't a fuck-up, to hold him while he talked about his difficult childhood and his dreams of being a real writer someday. So I did. I held him and told him we'd figure it out together. That's what couples do, right? They support each other through the hard times. The hard times just never seemed to end. His laptop died, and he needed mine for his freelance work. My laptop, the one I'd saved for 6 months to buy, suddenly became ours. His phone got shut off for non-payment, so he needed to use mine to call clients. My phone, with my plan, with my number, became his business line. My car started making this weird noise, but we couldn't afford to fix it because Marcus needed new design software for a huge project that was going to change everything. So I kept driving it with the weird noise, praying it wouldn't break down, while he installed $300 worth of programs on my laptop. The project never materialized. There was always some excuse. The client changed their mind. The budget got cut. They went with someone else at the last minute, but Marcus needed to keep the software, just in case. For the next opportunity that was definitely coming, I should have seen the pattern with his exes. He had a lot of stories about crazy girlfriends who couldn't handle his creative process, or got jealous of his ambition. There was Amanda, who went psycho when he broke up with her and supposedly stalked him for months. There was Jess, who was clingy and controlling, and wouldn't let him hang out with his friends. Every woman in his past was either crazy, jealous, controlling, or all three. I should have wondered what story he'd tell about me someday, but when he talked about them, he always made me feel special, different, better. You get me, Sarah. You understand what I'm trying to do with my life. You're not like them. I ate it up. Who doesn't want to be the exception? The one who's different, who's better than everyone who came before. What I didn't know then was that Marcus had a type. Women with steady jobs, their own apartments, good credit scores, and low enough self-esteem to be flattered by his attention. Women who would support his dreams, while he figured out what those dreams actually were. I found out later that Amanda hadn't stalked him. She'd been trying to get back the $4,000 he'd borrowed from her, and never repaid. Jess wasn't clingy and controlling. She'd gotten suspicious when she found out he was living with another woman, while claiming to be single. The stories were all lies, carefully crafted narratives, designed to make me feel sorry for him, to make me want to be different from his crazy exes, to make me prove my love by being more understanding, more supportive, more willing to sacrifice. My friends started pulling away during the second year. At first, I thought they were jealous of my relationship. Marcus was handsome, charming, articulate. He could talk about art and literature and politics in ways that made him seem sophisticated, worldly. When we went out in groups, he was often the center of attention, telling stories that made everyone laugh. But gradually, I noticed that invitations stopped coming. Group texts that used to include me went silent. When I did see my friends, they seemed distant, like they were walking on eggshells around me. You never hang out anymore, my friend Lisa said one day when I ran into her at the grocery store. I've been busy, I said. You know how it is when you're in a relationship. She gave me this look, this sad, frustrated look that I didn't understand at the time. We miss you, she said. The real you, not this person who can't make a decision without checking with Marcus first. I was offended. I wasn't checking with Marcus about everything. I was just being considerate, being a good girlfriend, making sure we didn't have conflicting plans. But looking back, I realized she was right. I had stopped making decisions independently. I'd stopped having opinions that weren't influenced by what Marcus thought. I'd stopped being me and started being half of us. When Lisa invited me to her birthday party, I asked Marcus if he wanted to come. He made this face, like he'd tasted something sour. Do I have to? Your friends are kind of basic. All they talk about is their jobs and their relationships. It's boring. So I went alone. But I spent the whole party defending Marcus to friends who'd made perfectly reasonable observations about his behavior. When Jenny mentioned that he never seemed to have a job, I explained that he was freelancing, that creative work was unpredictable. When Mike said he thought it was weird that Marcus never paid for anything when we went out, I made excuses about artists and their complicated relationships with money. I became Marcus's PR team, constantly managing other people's impressions of him, constantly explaining away behavior that didn't need explaining if it were actually acceptable. The credit cards were the beginning of the end. though I didn't know it at the time. First, he asked me to add him as an authorized user on my visa, just for emergencies, he said, so I can buy groceries if you're stuck at work late. It seemed reasonable. We were practically living together. It made sense for him to have access to money for household expenses. Then he asked me to co-sign for a card in his name because his credit was temporarily fucked from when his identity got stolen. That should have been a red flag, the size of Texas. But he had this story about how it wasn't his fault, how the credit agencies were screwing him over, how he just needed a fresh start. I'll be so careful, he promised, holding my hands across the kitchen table. I'll pay it off every month. This is just to rebuild my credit so I can get my own place eventually. I signed the papers at the kitchen table while he made me breakfast. Pancakes with blueberries, my favorite. He was so grateful, so sweet, promising he'd be careful and responsible. 6 months later, that card was maxed out at 5,000 miles. When I confronted him, he had another story. A medical emergency for his sister, unexpected car repairs, a freelance client who stiffed him on a big project. I'll pay it off as soon as I get back on my feet, he promised. This is just temporary. Everything with Marcus was always temporary. Temporary setbacks, temporary problems, temporary situations that somehow became permanent while I wasn't paying attention. Meanwhile, my own financial situation was getting worse. I'd stopped contributing to my savings account because there was never anything left over after covering both our expenses. I'd had to cancel my gym membership, my Netflix subscription, my weekly coffee dates with friends. All the little luxuries that made my life enjoyable disappeared one by one. But Marcus still had his luxuries. He still bought expensive coffee, still went out for drinks with his friends, still ordered takeout when he didn't feel like cooking. When I brought up the disparity, he made me feel selfish for wanting things while he was struggling. I'm working on my novel, he'd say. This is an investment in our future. When I get published, when I start making real money, I'll pay you back for everything. The novel that I never saw him work on. The novel that existed only in conversations, never on paper, never in progress, never anywhere I could see evidence of its existence. I think the moment I really started to wake up was when my friend Lisa came over for dinner. I'd been so isolated, spending all my free time with Marcus, or working extra shifts to cover our expenses. I'd barely seen my friends in months. Lisa took one look around my apartment and frowned. Where's all your stuff? What do you mean? Your grandmother's china, the bookshelf your dad made you, that painting you bought in Portland, the vintage record player, your mom's quilt. I looked around and realized she was right. My apartment looked different, emptier, more generic. Where were my personal touches? Where were the things that made this space mine? Oh, Marcus thought we should redecorate. Make it feel more like our place, instead of just mine. Lisa gave me this look. This concerned, careful look that friends give you when they're trying not to overstep, but they're worried about you. Where did all your stuff go? I couldn't answer her, because I honestly didn't know. It had disappeared gradually, replaced by Marcus's preferences, Marcus's style, Marcus's needs. My cozy reading corner had become his workspace. My kitchen table was covered with his design projects. My bedroom walls had his band posters, instead of my art prints, the things that were uniquely mine. The vintage teacups I'd collected from flea markets, the handmade ceramics I'd bought from local artists, the photographs I'd taken during my solo trip to Europe. All of it was gone, packed away in boxes in the closet, temporarily, while we figured out how to blend our styles. Except Marcus's style had completely taken over, and mine had disappeared. When had I stopped existing in my own space? When had I become a guest in my own home? That night after Lisa left, I found myself opening closets and drawers, looking for my belongings. So much was just gone. Not stolen exactly, but gradually removed, minimized, made to seem unimportant. The jewelry my grandmother had left me was missing from my dresser. When I asked Marcus about it, he said I'd put it somewhere safe and forgotten where. The handwritten letters from my sister were gone from the box where I'd kept them. Marcus said I must have thrown them away during one of our cleaning sessions. Books were the worst part. I'd had hundreds of books, carefully curated over years of browsing bookstores and libraries. My apartment had been full of them, stacked on shelves and side tables, and in piles by my bed. I loved being surrounded by stories, by knowledge, by the possibility of getting lost in someone else's world. Most of them were gone. Marcus had convinced me to donate them to the library because we don't really need all these books taking up space. He'd been so practical about it, so reasonable. We could always borrow books from the library, he said. We needed the space for his equipment, his projects, his life. I'd kept maybe 20 books, the ones Marcus deemed classics, or actually worth keeping. The rest, my poetry collections, my romance novels, my sci-fi paperbacks, my self-help books, my memoirs, had been donated away like they were worthless. Clutter instead of pieces of my identity. Standing in my nearly empty bookshelf, I realized I'd given away more than books. I'd given away evidence of who I was, what I loved, what made me feel alive. I'd let someone else decide what parts of me were worth keeping. The final straw came on my birthday. I'd been planning this small dinner party for weeks. Invited 6 of my closest friends. Bought ingredients for my mom's lasagna recipe. I was excited to cook for people I loved. To have everyone together in my home. Marcus disappeared that afternoon. Said he had to meet a potential client about a big project. He'd be back in time for dinner, he promised. Maybe even with champagne to celebrate. This could be the break I've been waiting for, he said, kissing me goodbye. This client has connections. Real money. If I nail this meeting, everything changes for us. 7 o'clock came and went. My friends arrived, and I kept making excuses. He'll be here any minute. You know how these business meetings run long. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I called him 3 times, straight to voicemail. My friends tried to make the best of it. We ate dinner, shared stories, laughed at old memories. But I could see the looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. The concern, the frustration, the sadness for what I'd become. He's probably just stuck in traffic, Jenny said. But her voice was too bright, too forced. Yeah, I said. He'll be here soon, but I knew he wouldn't. Deep down, I knew. At 10:30, after my friends had eaten my birthday lasagna and awkwardly headed home, he stumbled through the door drunk and reeking of perfume that wasn't mine. Shit, was that tonight? I'm so sorry, babe. The client wanted to go to dinner, and you know how important this project is for us. For us. Everything was always for us, when it benefited him. But I was the only one making sacrifices. He was swaying, on his feet, his shirt buttoned wrong, lipstick on his collar that he hadn't even bothered to wipe off. The business meeting had clearly been something else entirely. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at him standing in my doorway, at the mess he'd made of my birthday, of my friendships, of my life, and something inside me finally broke. Get out. Come on, Sarah. Don't be like this. You're being dramatic. Get out. For the first time in 3 years, my voice didn't waver. I wasn't asking. I wasn't negotiating. I was telling him to leave, and I meant it. He left that night, but he came back the next morning with coffee and apologies. He had this way of wearing me down, of making me feel guilty for being angry, of convincing me that my feelings were unreasonable. But for the first time, I didn't let him back in. I stood at my door in my pajamas and told him we were done. That's when he got mean. You'll never find anyone else who loves you like I do, he said, his voice cold, in a way I'd never heard before. You think you're so special with your little job and your little apartment, but you're nothing without me. Who else is going to put up with your anxiety? Your trust issues? Your boring-ass life? Each word hit like a physical blow. This was the man who'd whispered poetry in my ear, who told me I was beautiful, who'd said I was his everything. I wasted 3 years on you, he continued. 3 years I could have spent with someone who actually appreciates what she has. You're going to regret this, Sarah. You're going to realize what you lost, and it'll be too late. He kept going, listing all my flaws, all my insecurities, all the things I'd confided in him during vulnerable moments. The way I cried during sad movies, the way I got nervous in crowds, the way I worried about my weight, my appearance, my worth. He weaponized every intimate detail I'd ever shared with him. You're damaged goods, he said. Used up. No one's going to want you now. You're too old, too needy, too fucked up. You should be grateful I stuck around as long as I did. I closed the door and slid down against it, shaking. Because part of me believed him. Part of me thought maybe I was making a huge mistake. Throwing away the only person who'd ever loved me. That's what emotional abuse does to you. It makes you doubt your own reality, your own worth, your own perceptions. Even when you know something is wrong, you second-guess yourself. For a week, I almost took him back. He called constantly, left voicemails that swung between angry and pleading. He sent flowers to my work, with notes about how sorry he was, how he'd changed, how he couldn't live without me. The flowers were beautiful, expensive, paid for with my credit card. I realized later, he showed up at the bookstore during my shift, making a scene, begging me to talk to him in front of customers and my co-workers. When I refused, he accused me of cheating, of being cold and heartless, of throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. I gave you everything, he shouted, while my manager called security. I loved you more than anyone ever has, or ever will, and this is how you repay me? My co-workers stared. As security escorted him out, I spent my break crying in the storage room, humiliated and confused, and wondering if maybe he was right. Maybe I was throwing away real love, because I was too damaged to recognize it. But the thing that really saved me was my friend Grace. She'd been watching this whole relationship with growing concern, and when I finally broke down and told her everything, she didn't say, I told you so. She just listened, and then she said something that changed my perspective completely. Sarah, you keep talking about what you gave him, what you did for him, how much you loved him. But what did he ever actually give you? Not money, obviously, but emotionally? What did he bring to your life besides problems? I sat there in her kitchen, trying to think of an answer, and I couldn't. Every memory I had of feeling happy, or fulfilled, or loved during our relationship was tied to something I had done, something I had given, something I had sacrificed. The joy I felt wasn't from receiving his love. It was from the act of loving someone, from feeling needed and useful and important to another person. But that's not love. That's just codependency with better marketing. The real nightmare started after I finally blocked his number. That's when Marcus got creative. He couldn't contact me directly, so he started working through other people. Mutual acquaintances would text me saying Marcus was really struggling, and maybe I should hear him out. He convinced my co-worker, Jenny, that I was having a mental health crisis, and he was worried about me. She actually approached me during my break, asking if I was okay, if I needed someone to talk to. Marcus is just concerned about you, she said. He seems like he really cares. That's the thing about manipulators. They're charming. They know how to present themselves as the victim, the concerned ex, the good guy who just wants to make things right. People who don't know the whole story see this handsome, articulate man who's clearly heartbroken, and they want to help. Meanwhile, I looked like the villain, the cold, unforgiving ex-girlfriend who wouldn't even listen to his apologies, who wouldn't give a good man a second chance. He started showing up places he knew I'd be. At the coffee shop, where I got my morning latte. At the grocery store, during my usual shopping time. At the gym where I had a membership. Never approaching directly, never violating the restraining order I'd gotten, but always there, always watching, always making sure I knew he was present. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. I stopped going to my favorite places. I changed my routines, my schedule, my entire life to avoid running into him. I was the one in hiding while he got to act like the wounded party. Then the financial stuff started disappearing. First, I noticed my credit score had dropped 40 points overnight. When I pulled my report, there were inquiries I hadn't authorized, accounts I hadn't opened. The card I'd co-signed for him was maxed out at $8,000, not the $5,000 I thought. My bank account was overdrawn. Automatic payments I'd never set up were draining my checking account. When I called the bank, they told me the payments were authorized by an account holder, Marcus, who was still listed as an authorized user on my account from 2 years ago, when I'd added him just for emergencies. The emergencies had apparently been constant. Uber rides, DoorDash orders, Amazon purchases, streaming service subscriptions, all charged to my account, all authorized under his name, all perfectly legal, because I'd given him permission years ago and never revoked it. Getting him removed required a police report. Sitting in that sterile station, telling a bored-looking officer about my domestic situation, I felt humiliated, like I was admitting to the world that I'd been stupid enough to let someone destroy my credit, my savings, my financial stability. This is pretty common, the officer told me, which somehow made it worse. I wasn't even special in my stupidity. I was just another woman who trusted the wrong man. The paperwork took hours. Forms to fill out, statements to sign, evidence to provide. Every detail of my relationship with Marcus laid bare for strangers to judge. Every financial mistake I'd made, documented in official reports. The apartment was next. I came home from work one day to find half my stuff missing. The TV, my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry box, the good kitchen knives, even my fucking houseplants. Just gone. He still had keys. Of course he had keys. I'd given him keys a year and a half ago, and I'd never thought to ask for them back. Why would I? People don't usually rob their own girlfriends. But Marcus wasn't people. Marcus was someone who'd spent 3 years studying my routines, my weaknesses, my schedule. He knew exactly when I'd be at work, exactly what was worth taking, exactly how to hurt me the most. The police said it was a civil matter since we'd lived together, and he could claim the items were his. Unless I had receipts proving ownership, there wasn't much they could do. I had receipts for some things, my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry, but not for everything. And even then, the cops made it clear they had better things to do than chase down property disputes between exes. Maybe think of it as an expensive lesson, one officer suggested, about being more careful who you trust. As if I'd needed to learn to be more suspicious, more guarded, more afraid, as if the lesson I needed was to trust less, love less, give less of myself to other people. That night, I sat on my floor in my ransacked apartment and called my mom. I hadn't talked to her in months, because I'd been too ashamed to admit what was happening, too proud to ask for help. My mom had never liked Marcus. She'd been polite during his few visits to Ohio, but I could see the questions in her eyes. Why doesn't he have a job? Why does he let you pay for everything? Why does he seem so comfortable taking from you? I defended him, of course. Made excuses, explained away the red flags, insisted that she just didn't understand our dynamic. Now I had to admit, she'd been right all along. Oh honey, she said, when I finally stopped crying long enough to explain. Why didn't you call sooner? Because I was embarrassed. Because I felt stupid. Because admitting what had happened meant admitting that everyone who tried to warn me was right. Because asking for help felt like failure. My mom drove 8 hours from Ohio the next day with a U-Haul and my dad's toolbox. She helped me change the locks, clean up the mess, figure out what was missing. She didn't lecture me or say, I told you so. Even though she'd never liked Marcus from the beginning. Some people are takers, she said, while we sorted through what was left of my belongings. They're good at finding givers, and they're good at taking until there's nothing left. That doesn't make you stupid for giving. It makes them shitty for taking advantage. We worked in silence for hours, cataloging the damage, itemizing what was gone. My grandmother's silver candlesticks, the vintage camera I'd saved up to buy, the jewelry I'd collected over the years, the books, the art, the small treasures that had made my apartment feel like home. But it wasn't just the stuff. It was the violation, the betrayal, the realization that someone I trusted completely had been planning this theft for who knows how long. Every time I'd shown him where I kept important things, every time I'd mentioned the value of something I owned, he'd been taking notes for this moment. The worst part wasn't the money or the stuff though. The worst part was realizing how much of myself I'd lost along the way. I'd molded myself around Marcus's needs so completely that I barely remembered who I was before him. I used to write poetry. When's the last time I'd written anything that wasn't a grocery list or a work email? I used to hike on weekends, read 3 books a month, cook elaborate meals just for the fun of it. I used to call my friends regularly, go to concerts, take pottery classes at the community center. I used to have hobbies, interests, passions that had nothing to do with supporting someone else's dreams. All of that had disappeared gradually, replaced by Marcus's needs, Marcus's schedule, Marcus's crises. I'd stopped doing things I loved because he found them boring or childish or not practical. I'd stopped seeing friends because he didn't like them or they didn't like him. I'd stopped being myself because myself wasn't what Marcus wanted. Standing in my empty apartment, I realized I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I'd spent 3 years wanting what Marcus wanted, and now that he was gone, I felt hollow, like I was just an outline of a person with nothing inside. Who was I without someone to take care of? Who was I when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's problems? Who was I when I didn't have to justify my every decision to someone who claimed to love me, but never acted like it? I'd forgotten how to be alone. I'd forgotten how to make choices based on my own preferences, instead of someone else's approval. I'd forgotten what brought me joy, when that joy didn't have to be shared with someone who would criticize it, or diminish it, or make it about themselves. Rebuilding has been harder than I expected. Not just financially, though that's been brutal, I had to take a second job waitressing at a restaurant downtown to pay off the debt he'd racked up in my name. I'm living on rice and beans again, like I'm 22 instead of 29. I had to move to a smaller place because I couldn't afford my old apartment without a roommate, and finding a roommate when your credit is shot is nearly impossible. The new apartment is tiny, a studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet. But it's mine. Every stick of furniture, every decoration, every book on the shelf, it's all mine, chosen by me, paid for with money I earned. It's taken months to replace the basics. A bed, a table, a chair, dishes, towels, all the mundane necessities of daily life that I'd taken for granted. I've been shopping at thrift stores and garage sales, slowly rebuilding my life one purchase at a time. But the emotional rebuilding is harder. Some days I catch myself missing him. Not the real him, but the version of him that existed in my head. The charming, attentive man who made me feel special and loved. The man who never actually existed outside of my imagination. I miss having someone to text when something good happens at work. I miss having someone to cook dinner for, someone to watch movies with, someone to curl up next to at night. I miss feeling important to another person, feeling needed. What I don't miss is the anxiety, the walking on eggshells, the constant second guessing, the feeling like I was never doing enough, or being enough, or giving enough. I don't miss checking my bank account with dread, or making excuses for his behavior to my friends. I don't miss feeling like a supporting character in my own life. My therapist says it's normal to miss even bad relationships. Our brains are wired to crave connection, and when we've been in a relationship for years, we get addicted to the patterns, even the unhealthy ones. Breaking up doesn't just mean losing a person. It means losing a routine, an identity, a way of seeing yourself in the world. You weren't just Marcus's girlfriend, she told me during one of our sessions. You were the kind of person who had a boyfriend, someone who was loved, who was chosen, who mattered to another human being. Losing that identity can feel like losing yourself. She's helping me figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs. It's weird and scary and sometimes lonely as hell, but it's also kind of exciting, like I'm meeting myself for the first time in years. Dr. Kim is patient with me when I backslide, when I spend entire sessions talking about what I could have done differently, how I could have saved the relationship, whether I was too harsh or too quick to give up. She doesn't tell me I'm wrong for feeling this way. She just asks questions that make me think. What would you tell a friend who was in your situation? What would saving the relationship have required from you? What would have had to change for Marcus to become the partner you deserved? The answers are always the same. I would tell a friend to run. Saving the relationship would have required me to completely disappear as a person. For Marcus to become a good partner, he would have had to become a completely different person. I'm writing again. Terrible, self-indulgent poetry about heartbreak and betrayal and finding your way back to yourself. But still, I'm writing. It started with journal entries in therapy, but it's evolved into something more. I'm working on a collection of poems about the experience of losing yourself in someone else's needs, about the slow erosion of identity that happens when you love someone who doesn't love you back. Not really. Some of the poems are angry, raw, bitter pieces about lies and theft and emotional manipulation. Others are sad, mourning the person I used to be and the relationship I thought I had. A few are hopeful, looking toward a future where I might be whole again. I signed up for a poetry workshop at the community college. It's taught by this older woman named Margaret, who has wild grey hair and wears flowing scarves and speaks about poetry like it's a living thing that demands respect. The other students are mostly retirees and community college kids, but we all share this hunger to create something beautiful from our pain. When I read my first poem aloud, a piece about giving so much of yourself away that you forget what you originally looked like, the room went silent. Then Margaret said, "That's what poetry is for. To make the invisible visible. To give voice to experiences that don't have words." I signed up for a hiking group and actually showed up, even though I felt awkward and out of practice. The people were nice, normal. No one tried to borrow money or move into my apartment. The group meets every Saturday morning at different trails around the city. At first, I was the slowest one, out of breath after the first mile, stopping to rest while everyone else powered ahead. But they waited for me, offered encouragement, shared water and granola bars. There's something healing about being in nature, about moving my body just for the joy of movement, about being part of a group that expects nothing from me except my presence. No one needs my financial support or emotional labor. They just want to walk in the woods and breathe fresh air and maybe grab coffee afterward. Tom, the group leader, is a retired teacher who's been hiking these trails for 20 years. He knows all the best spots, hidden waterfalls, overlooks, with views of the city, old growth forests that make you feel tiny and connected to something larger than yourself. Nature doesn't care about your problems. He told me once, when I was having a particularly hard day, trees don't have drama, mountains don't need therapy. Sometimes you just need to remember that you're part of something bigger and older and more stable than whatever chaos is happening in your human life. I'm taking a pottery class too. My bowls are lopsided and my vases look like abstract sculptures, but I don't care. I'm making things with my hands, creating something that's mine and only mine. The pottery studio is this dimly lit basement space that smells like clay and dust. The teacher, Rosa, is this tiny woman with enormous hands who can center a piece of clay in seconds and make it look effortless. The rest of us struggle and swear and start over, but she never gets impatient. Clay has its own ideas, she says. When someone's pot collapses for the third time, you can guide it, but you can't force it. Sometimes you have to work with what you've got, instead of fighting for what you wanted. I think about this a lot outside of class. How much energy I'd spent trying to force my relationship with Marcus into the shape I wanted, instead of accepting what it actually was. How I kept trying to turn him into someone capable of love, when he was showing me over and over again that he wasn't. My first successful bowl is small and simple, glazed in a deep blue that reminds me of the ocean. It's not perfect. There's a small crack near the rim where I rush the process, but it holds water. It serves its purpose. Sometimes that's enough. Grace helped me set up a new dating profile last month. I'm not ready to actually meet anyone yet, but she said it was good practice to think about what I want in a partner, instead of just accepting whatever shows up. We spent an entire evening going through photos, trying to find ones that showed who I am now instead of who I was with Marcus. It was harder than I expected. So many of my recent photos had him in them, his arm around me, his presence defining the frame. I documented our relationship so thoroughly that I'd barely documented myself. We found some good ones eventually. Me at the pottery studio, covered in clay and grinning. Me at the top of a hiking trail, sweaty but proud. Me at the poetry reading, holding my notebook like it contained secrets. What are your non-negotiables? Grace asked, while we scrolled through photos of smiling men holding fish. I had to think about it. Financial responsibility, obviously. Someone with their own place, their own job, their own life. Someone who adds to my happiness instead of just taking from it. Someone who celebrates my successes instead of feeling threatened by them. Someone who sees me as a whole person, not just a source of support and validation. You sound like you want an actual adult, Grace said, laughing. Revolutionary concept, I know. We crafted a profile that emphasized my interests. Writing, hiking, pottery, books, instead of focusing on what I was looking for in someone else. The bio talked about rediscovering myself, about building a life I love, about wanting to share that life with someone who has their own life to share. I've gotten matches, messages from men who seem kind and stable, and boring, in the best possible way, but I'm not ready. I can feel it in my gut, this certainty, that I need more time to be whole by myself, before I try to be part of something with someone else. But I'm not rushing into anything. I'm learning to be alone without being lonely, to enjoy my own company, to make decisions based on what I want, instead of what someone else needs from me. Last weekend I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market, bought flowers just because they were pretty, came home and made myself an elaborate brunch, and read an entire book in one sitting. In the afternoon, I rearranged my furniture, the way I wanted it, not the way that accommodated someone else's needs. It was a perfect day, quiet and simple, and entirely my own. Marcus would have hated it. He would have called it boring, lonely, a waste of a weekend. He would have made me feel guilty for enjoying something so simple, so solitary. He would have turned my contentment into evidence of my inadequacy, proof that I didn't know how to live properly. But Marcus isn't here. Marcus is someone else's problem now, if the rumors I've heard are true. Apparently, he's living with a woman he met online, someone from the next town over who doesn't know his history. I feel sorry for her, but I also feel relieved. As long as he's focused on his new victim, he's leaving me alone. I got a letter from him last month, forwarded from my old address to my new one, which means he's still keeping tabs on me somehow. That's unsettling, but not unexpected. Marcus always needed to maintain control, to know what his exes were doing, to keep his options open. The letter was 3 pages of the same old bullshit. How sorry he was, how much he'd changed, how I was, the love of his life, and he'd made terrible mistakes, how he was in therapy now, working on himself, and he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he wanted me to know how much I meant to him. It was well written, articulate and emotional, and seemingly sincere. If I'd gotten this letter a year ago, I probably would have been moved by it. I might have even responded. But now I could see the manipulation tactics woven through every paragraph. The way he positioned himself as the victim of his own bad choices. The way he made vague promises about change without taking specific responsibility for what he'd done. The way he focused on his feelings, his pain, his growth, without acknowledging the real damage he'd caused to my life. I know I hurt you, he wrote. But I was in a dark place, struggling with depression and anxiety, and my own self-worth issues. I took my problems out on you because you were safe, because I knew you loved me enough to forgive me. That wasn't fair, but it wasn't malicious either. I never meant to cause you pain. Classic manipulation, making his abuse about his mental health instead of his choices, framing my love as the problem. If only I hadn't been so forgiving, he wouldn't have been able to take advantage of me, making it sound like he was the real victim, trapped by his own psychological struggles. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Then I took it out of the trash and read the rest, just to remind myself of who he really is, underneath the charm. Then I threw it away again and took the garbage out immediately so I wouldn't be tempted to read it a third time. The thing about giving everything to someone is that when they leave, you have to rebuild from scratch. Not just your bank account or your living situation, but your sense of self, your ability to trust, your understanding of what love actually looks like. Real love doesn't drain you. It doesn't leave you feeling empty and anxious and constantly questioning your own worth. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your identity, your friendships, your dreams, your financial stability. Real love adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. I'm learning what that looks like, slowly, carefully, with lots of therapy, and lots of mistakes, and lots of grace for myself on the days when I'm not sure I'm strong enough to do this. But I am strong enough, stronger than I thought, strong enough to walk away from someone I loved when I finally realized he didn't love me back, strong enough to rebuild my life from nothing, strong enough to trust my own perceptions, even when everyone else is telling me I'm wrong, strong enough to believe I deserve better, even on the days when I'm not sure I do. I joined the group the following week. There are 8 of us who meet every Thursday evening to share work and offer feedback. Some are working on novels, others on memoirs or short story collections. I'm the only poet, but they've embraced my work with enthusiasm and insight. It feels good to be known for something other than my capacity for sacrifice, to have people associate my name with creativity instead of drama, to be part of a group where I contribute my strengths instead of compensating for someone else's weaknesses. I've been thinking a lot about patterns lately. How the relationship with Marcus wasn't really an anomaly, but part of a larger pattern that started in childhood. My parents' marriage had similar dynamics. My mother constantly accommodating my father's moods, managing his emotions, sacrificing her own needs to keep the peace. I learned early that love meant self-sacrifice, that being needed was more valuable than being respected, that my worth was tied to how much I could give to other people, not to any inherent value I possessed as a human being. My therapist calls it learned helpfulness. The belief that your value comes from what you can do for others, rather than who you are. It's a common trait in people who end up in relationships with narcissists and users. We're trained from childhood to find our identity in serving others. Breaking that pattern requires more than just avoiding bad relationships. It requires fundamentally changing how I see myself, how I define my worth, how I show up in the world. It means learning to receive love instead of just giving it, learning to state my needs instead of just anticipating everyone else's, learning to take up space instead of shrinking to accommodate other people's egos. It's harder than it sounds. There are days when I feel selfish for considering my own happiness first. Days when I have to consciously resist the urge to fix other people's problems. Days when I catch myself apologizing for things that aren't my fault. But it's getting easier. Each time I choose myself over someone else's convenience. Each time I set a boundary without explaining or justifying it. Each time I let someone else handle their own emotional labor, I get a little bit stronger. 1 year after Marcus left, I decided to have a celebration, not a party. I'm not ready for anything that public yet, but a private acknowledgement of how far I've come. I made myself a fancy dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and wrote a letter to the person I was a year ago, the woman who was so broken she couldn't see her own worth, so desperate for love, she'd accept crumbs and call them a feast. I told her about the apartment with the big windows and the plants on every windowsill, about the savings account that's slowly growing, the credit score that's steadily improving, the debt that's being paid off month by month, about the poetry workshop and the hiking group and the volunteer work at the shelter. I told her about the silence that used to terrify her, how it's become peaceful instead of lonely, how she'd learned to fill that silence with her own thoughts and dreams instead of someone else's chaos. I told her about the mornings when she'd wake up and make decisions based on what she wanted instead of what someone else needed, about the evenings when she'd come home to space that was entirely her own, decorated with things she'd chosen, organized the way she liked it. I told her that she was enough, just as she was, without needing to prove her worth through sacrifice, that she deserved love that added to her life instead of subtracting from it, that she was worthy of respect, consideration, and genuine partnership. And I told her that she was going to be okay, more than okay, she was going to be happy. I'm still single, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned, between solitude and isolation. I'm learning to be my own good company, to treat myself with the kindness and attention I used to lavish on people who didn't deserve it. I have friends now, real friends who know my story, and like me anyway, who invite me to things because they enjoy my company, not because they need something from me, who celebrate my successes without making it about themselves, who offer support without expecting me to manage their problems in return. Grace and I have dinner every Tuesday. We cook together, try new recipes, drink wine, and talk about books and work and our hopes for the future. She's seeing someone new, a teacher named Mark, who seems kind and stable, and utterly boring in the best possible way. They split expenses, take turns planning dates, support each other's interests without losing themselves in the process. This is what healthy looks like, she told me last week. It's not passionate or dramatic or all-consuming. It's just easy. We make each other's lives better without making them complicated. I'm happy for her and surprised to find that I'm not jealous. Her relationship doesn't make me feel inadequate or lonely or like I'm missing out. It just makes me hopeful that someday I'll find something similar when I'm ready, when I've healed enough to recognize it, when I trust myself enough not to settle for less. My writing is getting published now. Small literary magazines, mostly. Publications that don't pay much, but offer the validation of being taken seriously as an artist. My poem about losing yourself in someone else's needs was accepted by a feminist magazine and generated responses from women all over the country who'd had similar experiences. One woman wrote to tell me that reading my poem had helped her recognize the patterns in her own relationship. Another said it had given her the courage to leave a situation she'd been enduring for years. A third said it had helped her explain to her therapist what she'd been through with her ex-husband. There's something powerful about transforming your pain into art that helps other people. It doesn't erase what happened or make it worth it, but it gives it meaning beyond just personal suffering. It turns your experience into something that can help others recognize their own truth. I'm working on a full collection now. Poems that trace the arc from self-loss to recovery. My writing group has been incredibly supportive, offering feedback that pushes me to dig deeper, to be more honest, to find the universal truths in my specific experience. The goal is to have a manuscript ready to submit to publishers within the year. It's ambitious, maybe unrealistic, but it feels good to have dreams again, to work towards something that belongs entirely to me, something no one can take away or diminish or make about themselves. I saw Marcus once more, about 6 months ago. I was coming out of the grocery store, and he was across the parking lot, getting out of a beat-up car I didn't recognize. He looked older, rougher around the edges. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a worn t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I waited for the familiar anxiety, the urge to run or hide, or somehow make myself invisible. Instead, I felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, not fear. Just a mild curiosity about how he was doing, and complete indifference to the answer. He started walking toward me, and I realized he was going to try to approach me to start a conversation I had no interest in having, so I got in my car and drove away. No drama, no confrontation, no need to engage with someone who'd lost the right to my attention. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the parking lot, watching me leave. He looked smaller somehow, less significant than he'd seemed when he was the center of my universe. Just a middle-aged man with poor impulse control and a pattern of using people who cared about him. I felt sorry for him briefly. Then I turned on the radio and forgot about him entirely. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in my story, if you're wondering whether what you're experiencing is normal, whether you're being dramatic or oversensitive or ungrateful, trust yourself. Trust that little voice in your head that says something isn't right. Trust your friends when they express concern. Trust your gut when it tells you that love shouldn't feel this hard, this draining, this one-sided. You deserve better, even if you don't believe it yet, even if everyone around you is telling you to be grateful for what you have, even if leaving feels impossible. You deserve better. You deserve someone who gives as much as they take, someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down, someone who adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. Someone who stays, not because they need something from you, but because they genuinely want to build a life with you. That person is out there, but more importantly, you can be that person for yourself. You can stay with yourself. You can be faithful to your own needs and dreams and healing. You can be enough for yourself, and once you are, you'll never again mistake depletion for love. I'm signing off now. It's Saturday morning, and I have flowers to buy, and books to read, and a whole day that belongs entirely to me. A whole life that belongs entirely to me. It took losing everything to realize how much I actually have. The apartment is quiet, but it's a good quiet. The silence of peace instead of abandonment. The silence of solitude instead of loneliness. The silence of a life that's mine to fill with whatever brings me joy. I'm going to make myself breakfast. Something elaborate and delicious, just because I can. I'm going to sit by the window with my coffee and watch the world wake up. I'm going to write in my journal, work on a new poem, maybe call my mom just to hear her voice. I joined the group the following week. There are 8 of us who meet every Thursday evening to share work and offer feedback. Some are working on novels, others on memoirs or short story collections. I'm the only poet, but they've embraced my work with enthusiasm and insight. It feels good to be known for something other than my capacity for sacrifice, to have people associate my name with creativity instead of drama, to be part of a group where I contribute my strengths instead of compensating for someone else's weaknesses. I've been thinking a lot about patterns lately. How the relationship with Marcus wasn't really an anomaly, but part of a larger pattern that started in childhood. My parents' marriage had similar dynamics. My mother constantly accommodating my father's moods, managing his emotions, sacrificing her own needs to keep the peace. I learned early that love meant self-sacrifice, that being needed was more valuable than being respected, that my worth was tied to how much I could give to other people, not to any inherent value I possessed as a human being. My therapist calls it learned helpfulness. The belief that your value comes from what you can do for others, rather than who you are. It's a common trait in people who end up in relationships with narcissists and users. We're trained from childhood to find our identity in serving others. Breaking that pattern requires more than just avoiding bad relationships. It requires fundamentally changing how I see myself, how I define my worth, how I show up in the world. It means learning to receive love instead of just giving it, learning to state my needs instead of just anticipating everyone else's, learning to take up space instead of shrinking to accommodate other people's egos. It's harder than it sounds. There are days when I feel selfish for considering my own happiness first. Days when I have to consciously resist the urge to fix other people's problems. Days when I catch myself apologizing for things that aren't my fault. But it's getting easier. Each time I choose myself over someone else's convenience. Each time I set a boundary without explaining or justifying it. Each time I let someone else handle their own emotional labor, I get a little bit stronger. 1 year after Marcus left, I decided to have a celebration, not a party. I'm not ready for anything that public yet, but a private acknowledgement of how far I've come. I made myself a fancy dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and wrote a letter to the person I was a year ago. The woman who was so broken she couldn't see her own worth, so desperate for love, she'd accept crumbs and call them a feast. I told her about the apartment with the big windows and the plants on every windowsill, about the savings account that's slowly growing, the credit score that's steadily improving, the debt that's being paid off month by month, about the poetry workshop and the hiking group and the volunteer work at the shelter. I told her about the silence that used to terrify her, how it's become peaceful instead of lonely, how she'd learned to fill that silence with her own thoughts and dreams instead of someone else's chaos. I told her about the mornings when she'd wake up and make decisions based on what she wanted instead of what someone else needed, about the evenings when she'd come home to space that was entirely her own, decorated with things she'd chosen, organized the way she liked it. I told her that she was enough, just as she was, without needing to prove her worth through sacrifice, that she deserved love that added to her life instead of subtracting from it, that she was worthy of respect, consideration, and genuine partnership. And I told her that she was going to be okay, more than okay. She was going to be happy. I'm still single, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. between solitude and isolation. I'm learning to be my own good company, to treat myself with the kindness and attention I used to lavish on people who didn't deserve it. I have friends now, real friends who know my story, and like me anyway, who invite me to things because they enjoy my company, not because they need something from me, who celebrate my successes without making it about themselves, who offer support without expecting me to manage their problems in return. Grace and I have dinner every Tuesday. We cook together, try new recipes, drink wine, and talk about books and work and our hopes for the future. She's seeing someone new, a teacher named Mark, who seems kind and stable, and utterly boring in the best possible way. They split expenses, take turns planning dates, support each other's interests without losing themselves in the process. This is what healthy looks like, she told me last week. It's not passionate or dramatic or all-consuming. It's just easy. We make each other's lives better without making them complicated. I'm happy for her and surprised to find that I'm not jealous. Her relationship doesn't make me feel inadequate or lonely or like I'm missing out. It just makes me hopeful that someday I'll find something similar when I'm ready, when I've healed enough to recognize it, when I trust myself enough not to settle for less. My writing is getting published now. Small literary magazines, mostly. Publications that don't pay much, but offer the validation of being taken seriously as an artist. My poem about losing yourself in someone else's needs was accepted by a feminist magazine and generated responses from women all over the country who'd had similar experiences. One woman wrote to tell me that reading my poem had helped her recognize the patterns in her own relationship. Another said it had given her the courage to leave a situation she'd been enduring for years. A third said it had helped her explain to her therapist what she'd been through with her ex-husband. There's something powerful about transforming your pain into art that helps other people. It doesn't erase what happened or make it worth it, but it gives it meaning beyond just personal suffering. It turns your experience into something that can help others recognize their own truth. I'm working on a full collection now. Poems that trace the arc from self-loss to recovery. My writing group has been incredibly supportive, offering feedback that pushes me to dig deeper, to be more honest, to find the universal truths in my specific experience. The goal is to have a manuscript ready to submit to publishers within the year. It's ambitious, maybe unrealistic, but it feels good to have dreams again, to work towards something that belongs entirely to me, something no one can take away or diminish or make about themselves. I saw Marcus once more, about 6 months ago. I was coming out of the grocery store, and he was across the parking lot, getting out of a beat-up car I didn't recognize. He looked older, rougher around the edges. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a worn t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I waited for the familiar anxiety, the urge to run or hide or somehow make myself invisible. Instead, I felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, not fear. Just a mild curiosity about how he was doing, and complete indifference to the answer. He started walking toward me, and I realized he was going to try to approach me to start a conversation I had no interest in having, so I got in my car and drove away. No drama, no confrontation, no need to engage with someone who'd lost the right to my attention. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the parking lot, watching me leave. He looked smaller somehow, less significant than he'd seemed when he was the center of my universe. Just a middle-aged man with poor impulse control and a pattern of using people who cared about him. I felt sorry for him briefly. Then I turned on the radio and forgot about him entirely. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in my story, if you're wondering whether what you're experiencing is normal, whether you're being dramatic or oversensitive or ungrateful, trust yourself. Trust that little voice in your head that says something isn't right. Trust your friends when they express concern. Trust your gut when it tells you that love shouldn't feel this hard, this draining, this one-sided. You deserve better, even if you don't believe it yet, even if everyone around you is telling you to be grateful for what you have, even if leaving feels impossible. You deserve better. You deserve someone who gives as much as they take, someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down, someone who adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. Someone who stays, not because they need something from you, but because they genuinely want to build a life with you. That person is out there, but more importantly, you can be that person for yourself. You can stay with yourself. You can be faithful to your own needs and dreams and healing. You can be enough for yourself, and once you are, you'll never again mistake depletion for love. I'm signing off now. It's Saturday morning, and I have flowers to buy, and books to read, and a whole day that belongs entirely to me. A whole life that belongs entirely to me. It took losing everything to realize how much I actually have. The apartment is quiet, but it's a good quiet. The silence of peace instead of abandonment. The silence of solitude instead of loneliness. The silence of a life that's mine to fill with whatever brings me joy. I'm going to make myself breakfast. Something elaborate and delicious, just because I can. I'm going to sit by the window with my coffee and watch the world wake up. I'm going to write in my journal, work on a new poem, maybe call my mom just to hear her voice.